Hey, good morning. Hey, I'm Marcus. Me and that guy, we're the same. I'm from the Effingham campus. I'm the student pastor out there. I've actually been here with Late Church a few times before. It's always really cool to be out here with y'all. I'm excited about it this morning too. But the last time y'all saw me here was around Christmas of this past year. But since then, there's been a pretty important development. That gorgeous lady right there on my arm is pregnant with our first kid. Thank you. We call him Nugget. We don't really know what the gender is yet. We don't know if it's a boy or a girl. And I should say that we don't know scientifically if it's a boy or a girl yet, because I know that it's a boy, but nobody really seems to be taking me seriously. My wife, she's 14 weeks along, and it's just been crazy. I mean, from the moment we found out she was pregnant to the time where we went to our first doctor's appointment and saw that heartbeat at 6 weeks. It was crazy. And we've been seeing all the images too. He's gone from like this little black circle and a fuzzy nothingness, and that was where Nugget came from. And then next time he kind of looked like something like a squid, and then after that, totally a baby. I mean, like toes and fingers, ears and a mouth. I mean, it was nuts. It's crazy. All that happened in 3 months. And in those 3 months, Lauren and I, just every time we go to the doctor, it's nothing but like surprise and shock, and it's so much fun. But as we've been talking about it, it's not the only thing that we've been finding surprising about Lauren being pregnant. Another thing we found kind of surprising is the amount of unsolicited advice we've been receiving. It works basically like this. You go up to a parent and you go, Lauren's pregnant. And they're like, oh, it's so great. They shake your hand. They say, congratulations. And then advice just starts pouring out of them. It's like they can't help it. And it's all over the place. I mean, you would get things like, oh, you know what you need to do? You've got to find out whether it's a boy or a girl and have a reveal party. And the next person's like, oh, please tell me you're not doing a reveal party. Those things are so awful. In fact, don't even find out what the gender is. Just let it be a surprise. Have you heard about the benefits of water birth? Research shows that it's healthier and less traumatic for the mom and for the baby. Oh, don't do that kooky water birth thing. Go to a hospital. Work for me, work for my mama, work for my mama's mama. And when you're there, get an epidural because you won't feel a thing. Epidurals paralyze people. And it's just back and forth like that. And I don't necessarily mean to make light of everything that goes on. I know this is all serious stuff, but I mean, it's just kind of you smile and nod. I don't know what else to really do as you just get inundated, just pour in all this advice. But I do have to say that there's one area of advice that I do pay a lot of attention to, and I'll say that area, domestic diplomacy. See, I don't know if you know this, but pregnant women have these things called hormones. And it is kind of new to me, so I'll go slow in case it's new for you too. It turns out that these hormones, they regulate the mom's body so that the baby grows healthy and strong in her tummy. But apparently all the hormones are doing that because none of them are left at the controls of her moods, which change dramatically, and they're all over the place. And sometimes I'm kind of scared. Now, just as a side note, this just kind of came to me. In case you're wondering, Lauren has heard everything that I'm teaching today, and so far, she's laughed every time. But it would actually kind of prove my point if I got in serious trouble after this message. I don't know. But anyway, it kind of changes rapidly. And so when anybody looks at me and says, hey, I got some advice on how to handle a pregnant wife, I'm like all ears. I'm ready to write it down. And just the other day, we had a silver-haired, nice lady, grandma out of the Effingham campus, and she was looking at me with, I think pity would describe it. And she was saying, Marcus, let me give you some advice about Lauren. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, don't eat her food. I'm not proud to say this, but I kind of got the look on my face like a dog that hears a new noise. Like I was kind of confused, and I'm going, but we don't separate our food, so how do I know what food is mine and what food is hers? She shook her head and she went, Marcus, all the food is hers. It's like I'd found the Mr. Miyagi of pregnancy. I was like, oh, that's good. That's good. I haven't eaten in 2 weeks, but I feel okay. It's been really crazy. I mean, I don't remember I don't remember, as I was just thinking about it, it seemed like a new thing to just get this amount of advice all the time, but really as I started to dig into it, and really as I thought about the message this morning, I realized that actually I've been receiving a lot of advice for a long time. I mean, right now it's advice about how to be a good husband while your wife is pregnant. Before that, it was advice on how to be a good husband during the first couple years of marriage. Before that, it was advice on the honeymoon. Before that, advice on the wedding. Before that, advice on how to propose. Before that, on who and how to date. I received advice on what career path to choose, on buying my first house, on what classes to take, on what roommates to have, on where to live on campus or off campus, what major to declare, what school to choose. I mean, in all of these areas, I was receiving tons of advice, and in every example I just gave you, the voices that I chose to listen to or chose to ignore affected those decisions. And even now, as much as I like to make light of it, the voices that I choose to listen to right now or choose to ignore will affect how the rest of this pregnancy goes. Because the voices that you listen to will influence what you do. I mean, think about it. Think about the best decision you have ever made. I mean, the kind of decision where even as you hoped things would work out, they worked even better than you could have ever imagined. And when you look back on that decision, maybe you can remember that there were certain voices that you were listening to. And as you look back on that great decision, you think to yourself, man, I am so glad I listened to those people. And on the other hand, maybe you can think of the worst decision you've ever made. The decision that carried with it shame and regret, maybe had so much fallout that you're still dealing with it today. Maybe as you think about that decision, you can remember a voice that you listened to and you wish you hadn't. Maybe even if you had an opportunity, you would go back and give yourself the exact same advice that you were spending so much energy ignoring at the time. Today I want to tell you a story. In the story, we're going to look at a man who is going to be faced with a situation he's never had to face before. And he's going to be given a choice. And each of these, this choice, either side, either way that he goes, will carry with it consequences. And just like you and I, on either side of him, he will have two different groups of advisors carrying two different pieces of advice. What we're going to do is we're going to watch him go through his process and how he makes his decision. And then we're going to watch him deal with the consequences of that choice. And it's going to remind us the people that you listen to, the voices that you listen to, they will influence what you do. We're going to be in 1 Kings 12. If you have your own Bible, please go ahead and turn there. We'll dig into it in a second. If you don't, that's all right. We're going to put it up on the screens next to us here so that you can follow along if you'd like to. Before we actually get into the scripture, though, what I would love to do is just remember, kind of provide some context. So, if you've been with us the past few months, you know that Lake Church has been doing a series called The Story, where we've been looking through the Bible chronologically, beginning to end. And as we're doing that, what we're doing is we're trying to get the overarching story of what God has been up to in this world. Specifically, how He has been working and has worked and will continue to work to repair and restore the relationship between His people and Himself. The relationship that was broken by our sin. And right now in the story, what we're looking at is we're looking at a group of people called the Israelites. The Israelites were God's chosen people. Basically, He grabbed one nation out of the entire world with the idea of, I am going to use this nation to reveal myself to everyone else. So He revealed Himself to this nation, and they in turn were supposed to reveal Him to the world. And right now, as we look at them, they're actually the kingdom of Israel because they have a king, right? And so they have a king, they're a kingdom, but for a while they weren't a kingdom because for hundreds of years the Israelites actually didn't have a king. In a time in history where most governments were monarchies, they actually didn't have a king. But at some point they started to complain about that. God, we want a king. God, give us a king. Please give us a king. Everyone else has a king. We want a king. And God said, well, I'm your king. You don't need a dude with a golden crown. You got me. The Israelites said, no, we don't want, thanks, but, keep taking care of us, but we want a king. We want a guy with a crown. We want a king. And as I was thinking about this, I'm going, it's really important to understand why the Israelites wanted this so bad because it really fits into the story we're going to look at in a second. So I was trying to think of an example of what the Israelites were looking for, and what I came up with was the Israelites wanted Prince Ali, fabulous he, Ali Ababwa. Do y'all remember this from Aladdin? When he comes in with all the riding elephants and stuff like that, there's the big song. That's what the Israelites wanted. They wanted someone who was powerful, rich, and handsome so that he could be like the centerpiece of their nation. They wanted someone that after you won a big battle, he could ride a chariot down the streets and they could all cheer and scream and shout. That's what they wanted. They wanted palaces filled with gold and rooms filled with exotic type mammals. Does he have a zoo? I'm telling you, it's a world-class menagerie, Prince Ali. In case you need a reminder that I'm a student pastor, that's it. That's it. And I was working through this. I'm like, you know what? It's a goofy example, but they'll remember it. They'll remember my awful, ridiculous singing on stage. Anyway, all right, so that's what they wanted. And then God said, you don't want that. You think you want that? You don't want that. Because guess who provides all the gold? Your taxes. And guess who wins all the wars? Your sons, who he's going to make fight for him. Kings are takers. You don't want a king. You want me. But they weren't listening. They wanted the king, and God said, fine. So he gave them the kings. And the first one, his name was Saul. Saul was kind of a dud. He started following God, then went his own way, and God said, if you keep going your own way, I'm going to replace you. Saul kept going his own way. God replaced him with David. Now, David was a stud. He was awesome. He was kind of this warrior poet guy. The Bible calls him man after God's own heart. And he actually did great stuff. But then his son followed him, and his son Solomon, now he's the guy that the Israelites were looking for. Rich, powerful, handsome. And Israel was the same way as long as Solomon was ruling. Israel was as rich as they ever were, as powerful as they ever were, as admired as they ever were. Solomon was their Prince Ali, handsome as he, Ali Ababwa. That's exactly what they wanted. That's what they got in Solomon. But it turns out that God tends to be right a lot of the time. And all the people that paid for all that gold that Solomon had, it was the Israelites. All the wars, all the building of these palaces and temples, it was all the Israelites. And they were tired of it. And this is where we pick up our story, because Solomon has just died. His son Rehoboam is about to become the next king of Israel, and that's where it starts in 1 Kings 12, verse 1. It says this, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all the Israelites had gone there to make him king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, Jeroboam was a official in Solomon's kingdom. But God actually told Jeroboam that he would one day have part of the kingdom of Israel for himself. And Solomon didn't like that. And so Solomon tried to kill him. Jeroboam ran away. Solomon's dead, so Jeroboam's back. That's what it says. He was still in Egypt where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. So then they sent Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now you lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam answered, go away for 3 days and then come back to me. So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people, he asked. Now, let's do a quick review in case nobody knows. What was one of the things that Solomon was known for more than anything else? Solomon was known for his wisdom. These are advisors to the most wise man that has ever lived. These guys understand stuff. They've learned from Solomon. Solomon learned from them. These are wise advisors. They replied, if today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with them and were serving him. In other words, the men that had the most to gain from Rehoboam. He asked them, what is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? And the young men who had grown up with him replied, tell these people who have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Do I even need to continue? We know how this ends, but I'll keep going. Verse 12. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam as the king had said, "Come back in 3 days." The king answered the people harshly. Rejecting the advice given to him by the elders, he followed the advice of the young men and said, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was of the Lord to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Ahijah the Shilonite. When all Israel saw the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel, look after your own house, O David." Remember, David is Rehoboam's grandfather. The Israelites are basically saying, all right, you make our yoke heavy? Try to find us, because we're leaving. They seceded. They left. The kingdom of Israel, God's people, the kingdom and group of people that was supposed to represent a loving, powerful, forgiving God, just broke in half. The Israelites went home. As for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. Basically, there's two kingdoms now, a lower kingdom and an upper kingdom. Lower kingdom is now called Judah, because that's basically the only group of people that still followed Rehoboam, the house of Judah. The majority of them went north, away from him, and formed the kingdom of Israel, because they had the majority of the clans of Israel with them. Rehoboam listened to the wrong voice, and he lost a kingdom. Oh, come on. We know this, because we know people who listened to the wrong voice and lost their job. We know people who listened to the wrong voice and lost their marriage. We know people who listened to the wrong voice and lost their peace, their clear conscience, their integrity. In fact, that person might be you. Rehoboam's choice was your choice, and his regret is your regret. To study this story, you know what I think is so interesting? You can see the results, the conclusions, the consequences a mile away in the story. You can see it coming. You don't have to be a Bible scholar. You don't have to be a Bible scholar. You knew how it would end. You didn't even need context. And you could step right into the middle of that story and go, Ixnay on the Orpianske, man. Just don't say that thing about the whole beating people with scorpions. It doesn't seem like a good idea. I don't think that's going to end well. You don't need context. You don't need to be a Bible scholar. And you see how this is going to end. And what I think is really interesting is I think the same thing applies to your life and to my life. See, I believe that I could parachute into your life right now and look around, and I could find something in your life that I could look at and go, who in the world told you to do that? Where did you get that advice? Because that's awful. And I don't mean to throw stones, because the truth is I believe you could do the same thing with me. Because I think we all have blind spots. We all have people that we're listening to that we shouldn't, or we have people that we're not listening to that we should. And the really scary thing is that some of the people in this room right now could be heading for a disaster and not be able to see it coming, but someone else could come into your life, look at it from the outside, and see it coming from miles away. The voices that you listen to, they will influence what you do. And if you believe that, if you believe that there's something within the story of Rehoboam that we can apply to our lives, and I would like to ask you, isn't it worth doing the hard work to figure out and make sure that we're listening to who we should be listening to? If they have that much influence and if the consequences can be that great, isn't it worth doing the hard work? And if you think that it is, I want to give you some things to think about. How to find the right people in your life that you should be listening to. And the first thing I want to do is just ask you a question. First question, who are you listening to? Who are you listening to? Are you listening to your parents? Listening to a boyfriend or a girlfriend? A sibling? You're listening to a childhood friend or a classmate or a coworker? Who is it that you listen to the most and therefore has the most influence over what you do? Which kind of leads me right into that next question, which is, who are you listening to that you need to quit listening to? See, the people closest to us aren't necessarily the best advisors. They're the easiest people from which to get advice. That doesn't mean the advice they're giving is any good. I'm a student pastor, as I've mentioned a couple of times, and I was talking to my students. They're a great source of stories. Sometimes not so good, and sometimes funny, and sometimes great, but I basically was asking the question, just threw it out there. Hey, why don't one of y'all tell me a story in which you got some really good advice or some really bad advice? And a student came to me, and she sent me a Facebook message, and she said, well, my parents don't think I should date yet. I mean, alarms, red flags, like, just danger, like I already know, but I kept reading. Parents don't think I should date yet. But this guy liked me, and I liked him, and my parents said no, but I asked my big brother what I should do. Now, when she said that, I groaned out loud, which is probably why no student ever comes to me for relationship advice. But in my defense, you don't ask the brother that has been kicked out of the house for advice on whether or not to obey your parents. That's who she went to. And the brother said, follow your heart. Do what makes you feel good. Do whatever makes you happy. Which, as I can hear the little groans that are responding to me, many of us know that that is awful advice. If you didn't know, here's a freebie. Terrible advice. Don't follow your heart. Don't just do what makes you feel good. Bad ideas. And what's interesting about the advice that my student got from her brother is it's actually very similar to the advice that Rehoboam got from his friends. If you remember, the elders, they gave advice. It was, serve the people, be gentle to them, and they will serve you forever. It was an if-then statement. If you do this, then this will happen. They gave not only the advice, but they worked through the consequences with Rehoboam. Now compare that to his friends. His friends said, who are they? Tell them what's up. Tell them who you are. Tell them how powerful you are. Give them a piece of your mind. And that's where the advice stopped. Because what they never did was, if you do that, if you tell them that you will beat them with scorpions, then... Because you know what's implied there is they don't care about the consequences. Neither did the big brother. And if you're getting advice where they give you the if but not the then, they give you advice but they never work through the consequences with you, let that be a red flag. Perhaps you're not getting the best advice from that person. Back to my student. Let's finish the story together, shall we? Okay, guy likes her, she likes him. Parents say no, brother says follow your heart. Does the student date the guy or not? Yes, she does. Does anybody want to guess how long the relationship lasted? What was that, a week? Nice. Someone knows students. Yes, a week. And then he dumped her for another girl. Okay, now here's where the fun starts. Did the parents find out or not? Oh yeah, they always find out. And now the parents have trouble doing what? Trusting their daughter. And what other relationship is messed up? The relationship with the parents and the brother. The brother. Isn't it interesting how without knowing this student at all, you couldn't pick him out of a lineup, you were able to finish the end of her story. And yet she walked right into that beehive. Now she's dealing with the consequences. Which leads me into my next question. Who should you be listening to? Who should you be listening to? Well, we all need someone in our lives that can finish the story for us before we actually get to the end. We need someone to do for us what we just did for that student. This is how that will end. If you do this, this is what will happen. In other words, what we really need is we need someone that can provide us with some good old-fashioned spoilers. Now, if you don't know what a spoiler is when someone tells you the end of the story before you get to see it for yourself. That's a spoiler. And some people hate spoilers, but I figured that maybe there's some people that you're not familiar with the term, and so I thought, well, what I need to do is I need to provide examples of spoilers. Now, for those of you that hate spoilers, spoiler alert, they're coming. For those of you that don't really understand what spoilers are, I'll provide you with some examples now. They're related. They're also related. They win. They also win. But they actually lose. She chooses him, not him. He chooses the red pill. All right? He dies. He lives. He's alive. He's dead. And I've watched the show twice, and I don't know. So the real spoiler is it's not worth it. All right? If you haven't watched it, yeah, all right. I just alienated half of you. Okay, spoilers. Now, stay with me here. When it comes to movies, when it comes to books, when it comes to TV shows, you may hate spoilers more than anyone else you know. But when it comes to your life, it's more than just a story. There are real relationships at stake, real pain to be felt or avoided, real integrity to be lost or gained. We could all use someone to look at us and say, I know how this story ends, and it's great. Or, I know how the story ends. You need to change stuff real fast. And there are people out there that can do that for us. Here's a couple people you should look for. First, try to find someone who is where you want to be 10 years from now. And not just driving the car you want to drive, living in the house you want to live in, making the numbers, zeros you want to make. Someone that is where you want to be occupationally, relationally, and spiritually. And then offer to take them out to lunch. Now, I realize this is actually relatively simple, but not necessarily easy, because I've been through this. There's a guy in my life who I had a tremendous amount of respect for. I loved this man. I always used to think to myself, man, how I would love to know what he thinks about this. I would love to know what he would do in my situation. The problem is it's really easy to idolize someone who is where you want to be in 10 years. And that's what I did. I thought to myself, the man has a lot of responsibility in his job. He's got a wife. He's got kids. He didn't have time for me. And what I was doing is I was saying that man's no for him. And what I found out when I finally worked up the courage is you can get pretty much anyone to spend an hour with you if you're willing to buy their overpriced coffee. That's what I did. And it worked. And now, about once a month, I get to meet with this guy, and I cherish the time I get to have with him. I love gleaning just wisdom from this man. Maybe you can't think of someone like that, or maybe, honestly, you're not really sure where you want to be 10 years from now. I would recommend you join a life group here at Lake Church. Life groups are groups of people that meet together to discuss what's taught here at Lake Church during the week, but it's more than that. It's a group of people that have decided to intentionally do life together, to figure out things like accountability, to figure out things like how do you live for Jesus in a world that makes it very hard to live for Jesus. And you might ask, Marcus, how can you recommend a group of advisors if you don't even know what people are going to be in this life group? It's a good question. I can recommend them because I know they're committed to using this. Think practically about it. If you have a new iPhone, but you're having difficulty navigating it, you're not going to call Microsoft. You're going to call Apple because they made the operating system. God made this world. He made the operating system. And if you want to figure out how this world works, there's no better place than God and His Word. It's why life groups are so valuable. I actually had the pleasure of teaching this to my students first. I taught this on Wednesday, and right here was basically where I kind of wrapped it up and finished. And with y'all, I want to go a little bit further. So while I was teaching this lesson, on the second row was the student who shared with me her story. And while I was teaching it, I looked at her, and I wasn't using her name, obviously, but You could see that hearing it was hurting, and I was so grateful for her courage and her willingness to say that I could use the story, but I knew it hurt. And I hurt for her too, because I love my students. And watching them do that, watching them listen to the wrong advice, make the wrong decision, and then deal with the consequences, it's painful to me. We all know what it's like to deal with the consequences of our poor decisions, our sin. And, I want to make sure that nobody thinks that the Bible puts God up as sitting on a throne with lightning bolts, just waiting for one of us to step out of line so he can smack us as hard as he can. And it's not like that. The Bible instead puts it out that God created a world that works in certain ways. There are principles, such as the voices that you listen to will influence what you do. And if you go against what he puts forward as truth, well, there are consequences. As much as I would love to say that there's a magic prayer that will just wipe all that out, it's not how it works. It's if you spend a week or a month or a year digging yourself into a hole, sometimes it takes a week or a month or a year climbing back out. Now, I want to be clear about this. The Bible says, and I believe, that Jesus, God's Son, he came and he died for us. He paid the ultimate punishment for our sin. And so if you've asked Jesus to be your Lord and your Savior, you don't have to worry about your standing with God. But Jesus died for more than just to save us from something. He died to save us to something. He didn't just die to save us from hell. He died to save us to an abundant life. A life filled with joy and peace. A life defined by courage and power and love. Jesus freed us so that we could run after him. But how are you going to run if you're spending all your time digging yourself out of the hole that you made for yourself? That's why I am so passionate about teaching these students and hooking them up with small group leaders and people like that that can give them strong advice, that can guide them in their lives so that they can avoid the pitfalls and be able to run after that abundant life. And I want the same for you. So may God show us who we should be listening to. And may he use those people to help us avoid the pits and the disasters so that we can run after Christ and have an abundant life in him.